The 1989 FIA Formula One World Championship was the 40th season of FIA Formula One motor racing. It began on the 26th of March and ended on the 5th of November. Alain Prost won his third Drivers' Championship, and McLaren won the Constructors' Championship. The Drivers' Championship was decided in controversial circumstances at the penultimate race of the season in Japan, when Prost and teammate Ayrton Senna, who needed to win the race, collided in the closing laps. Prost retired while Senna rejoined the track after a push start and crossed the line first, only to be disqualified for not rejoining the track correctly. This handed Prost the title, his last with McLaren before joining Ferrari in 1990. The season also saw an unprecedented number of entries, with 21 constructors originally entered, fielding a total of 40 cars. However, First Racing withdrew from the championship before the opening race, leaving 20 constructors fielding a total of 39 cars, which remains the highest entry in the modern era. This year was the first year of the new mandatory 3.5-litre engine formula following the FIA's ban on turbocharged engines following the conclusion of the previous season. Renault also returned as engine supplier for the first time since 1986, with both Renault and Honda developing engines with a V10 configuration, an engine configuration never previously used in Formula One. As of 2025, this was the last time Honda and the same engine manufacturer won both the Formula One and MotoGP World Manufacturers titles in the same year. Unfortunately, in this season, while testing for the new AGS F1 at the Jacarapagua circuit in Rio de Janeiro, Streif suffered a huge high-speed accident and the damage to his back left him with tetraplegia. About teams, McLaren, having won 15 of the 16 races in 1988, kept their successful driver lineup of 1985 and 1986 world champion Alain Prost and defending champion Ayrton Senna. They would drive the new MP4 powered by a Honda V10 engine. Ferrari completed the signing of British driver Nigel Mansell, taking the place of Michele Alboreto alongside Austrian Gerhard Berger. The new 640, designed by John Barnard, featured a semi-automatic electronic gearbox, the first of its kind, as well as the team's first 12-cylinder engine since 1980. Williams recruited Belgian driver Thierry Boutsen from Benetton as Mansell's replacement, alongside veteran Italian Riccardo Patrese. The team had also done a deal with Renault, returning to F1 after a 3-year break, that would see them have exclusive use of the French company's V10 engines. For most of the season, Williams ran with the FW12C, an updated version of their 1988 car, before the new FW13 was introduced at the Portuguese Grand Prix. Lotus kept their 1988 lineup of triple world champion Nelson Piquet and Satoru Nakajima, but lost their Honda engines. The new Lotus 101, designed by Frank Durnay, used the Judd V8 engine instead. Benetton retained Alessandro Nannini and signed British rookie Johnny Herbert to replace Boutsen. However, Herbert was still recovering from severe foot injury sustained in a Formula 3000 crash at Brands Hatch, and was eventually replaced by McLaren test driver Emanuele Pirro. Benetton continued as the de facto Works Ford team, but had to make do with the Cosworth DFR-powered 1988 car, the B188, until the new HB-powered B189 was introduced at the French Grand Prix. Tyrrell retained Jonathan Palmer and took back Alboreto, who had previously driven for the team between 1981 and 1983. After a sponsorship dispute, Alboreto was replaced by French newcomer Jean Alesi, who at the same time was on his way to winning the F3000 championship. The Brabham team returned after missing 1988, with Stefano Modena and Martin Brundle, fresh from winning the 1988 World Sports Prototype Championship, driving the Judd-powered BT58. Both drivers were forced to pre-qualify for the first half of the season. The French Laris team continued running Lola chassis, but ditched the Ford Cosworth V8 engines in favor of the new Lamborghini V12, designed by Mauro Forghieri. The team started the year with their 1988 lineup of Yannick Dalmaz and Philippe Alliot, but Dalmaz was recovering from Legionnaire's disease and was eventually replaced by Eric Bernard, who in turn made way for Alboreto. Zach Speed, having produced their own turbo engine since their debut in 1985, were forced to switch to an outside supplier in the form of Yamaha, the Japanese company appearing in F1 for the first time with its own V8 engine. Their new car, the 891, was designed by Gustav Brunner. West German Bernd Schneider, in his second year with the team, and Japan's Aguri Suzuki were both forced to pre-qualify throughout the season. Osella were one of several teams to expand from one car to two, with Nicola Larini being joined by veteran Piercarlo Ghinzani, returning for a third stint with the team. The all-new FA1M was powered by the Ford Cosworth DFR. Ligier retained French veteran René Arnoux and signed newcomer Olivier Grouillard, who replaced experienced Swede Stefan Johansson. The team also switched from Judd engines to the Ford Cosworth DFR, powering the new JS33. AGS had retained Philippe Streiff for 1989, but the Frenchman crashed heavily at Rio while testing prior to the Brazilian Grand Prix, suffering spinal injuries which left him as a quadriplegic and ended his racing career. His place was taken by Gabriele Tarquini, who had planned to drive for the Italian first team that year before they pulled out. AGS also expanded to two cars, the second originally being driven by Joachim Winkelhock, younger brother of the late Manfred Winkelhock. After first racing withdrew from the championship, the only entirely new team for 1989 was Onyx Grand Prix, who had previously enjoyed success as the Semi-Works March team in Formula 2 and Formula 3000. The Onyx ORE1, designed by Alain Jenkins and powered by the Ford Cosworth DFR, was driven by Johansson and Belgian rookie Bertrand Gachot, who would eventually be replaced by Finnish newcomer JJ Leto. About 1989 technical regulations, and in order to combat rising costs, turbocharged engines were banned at the end of 1988, as the governing body felt them to be making the sport dangerous and expensive. However, turbocharged engines returned from the 2014 season onwards. The engine displacement was mandated at 3.5 litres. In the interest of safety, the driver's feet must be situated behind the front axle line. This rule had been introduced in 1988 and was mandatory for all new chassis, but any that were a carryover from 1987 were not obliged to comply with the rule, which was only made compulsory for all cars from 1989. Due to the loss of the powerful turbo engines, designers were locked in a race to make the cars as aerodynamic as possible. As such, designers were introducing cockpits and front ends that were smaller and far more cramped than ever, at the expense of driver comfort. The problem was first highlighted at the opening round in Brazil, with focus on the Ross Brawn-designed Arrows cars. Both drivers, Derek Warwick and Eddie Cheever, suffered severe cramping and felt that the new regulations were in fact making it more dangerous. But let's go now to discover all the 16 Grand Prix about this 1989 F1 season. The climate as the Formula One circus arrived at Jacarapagua was one of much optimism in what many saw as a new age, with many reveling in the brutal and much more appealing sounds of the V10 and V12 engines. Brazil proved to be an excitement-filled race, and dramatic too. Qualifying had a few surprises, with Ricardo Patrese scoring his first front-row start since 1983, next to the home favourite, world champion Ayrton Senna. Williams and Renault were both surprised by the position, but both highly pleased with Thierry Boutsen qualifying fourth alongside the high-powered Ferrari of Berger and in front of Prost, who could only manage fifth. The race started with a bang, as Senna's hopes at a home Grand Prix victory were dashed after a clash with Berger in the first turn. In what would prove to be a regular occurrence during the season, the semi-automatic transmission in the Ferrari 640 allowed Berger to get a lightning start from third on the grid, and he attempted to go inside of Senna and Patrese into the turn. Senna refused to give room, causing a collision that destroyed the front wing of his car. Patrese got through unscathed and in the lead of his record-breaking 177th Grand Prix start, whilst Berger was out on the spot while Senna was forced to pit for repairs and would finish the race 2 laps down in 11th place. Double world champion Alain Prost's McLaren had been having problems all weekend, with the Frenchman finding the McLaren MP4 hard to set up, and when his two-stop strategy was ruined by a clutch failure, he knew he had to continue the race, having made just one of his scheduled 2 pit stops on the notoriously abrasive Rio circuit. He finished second. Nigel Mansell secured a surprising win for the Scuderia, with no problems despite ongoing gearbox faults all weekend and a lack of winter testing. The final step of the podium was taken by local Mauricio Gugelmin. Grand Prix debutant Johnny Herbert, Derek Warwick and Alessandro Nannini scored the remaining points. Warwick was desperately unlucky. He lost over 20 seconds in a slow pit stop and only finished 17.8 seconds behind Mansell at the finish, suggesting a win, which would have been both his and Arrow's first, or podium place had gone begging. During the award ceremony, Mansell cut his hand open on the trophy, ending the celebration early. This was to be the last race at this fast, flat and abrasive Jacques-Rapagua circuit in Rio de Janeiro. Formula One would move to a shortened Interlagos circuit in Senna's hometown of São Paulo for the 1990 season onwards. At Imola in Italy, McLaren settled on the front row of the grid and stayed that way for the race, with Mansell's Ferrari retiring midway with gearbox issues. Gerhard Berger, despite showing promise by setting the fastest time in the wet Friday qualifying, suffered front wing failure thanks to Berger's curb-hopping style and careered off the track at Tamburello at high speed and hit the concrete retaining wall very hard and spun multiple times along the wall. This forced the race to be stopped after the fuel spilled all over. Berger's car burst into flames after the car came to a standstill. Berger miraculously survived with just a broken rib, shoulder bone, and burns to his back and hands, due to rescue crews removing him from the wreck in less than 60 seconds. Race was restarted not too long after. Senna went on to win with Prost second. Patri's engine failed and Boutsen was disqualified, so the third place was taken by the Benetton Ford of Alessandro Nannini. Warwick and Tyrrell's Jonathan Palmer secured the remaining point-paying positions. In Monaco, with Berger out, there were 29 cars in qualifying instead of 30, because Ferrari did not have a replacement driver. Senna had scored his third pole of the season, with the number 2 car of Prost again alongside. Senna went on to win by almost a whole minute over Prost, while Stefano Modena secured a valuable third for the underfunded Brabham team on its return to Formula One after a year out, while Alex Caffey finished fourth in the Dallara and Michele Alboreto secured his first point since leaving Ferrari for Tyrrell. Martin Brundle scored the remaining point by finishing sixth. At the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico City, Mexico, Gerhard Berger made a return despite continued pain in his fingers. However, transmission and gearbox problems forced the Ferraris to retire from point-scoring positions for the third race straight. McLaren and Senna took a third win on the trot by a differing choice of tyres. Prost's choice, and the wrong set of tyres being given to him at a pit stop, which prompted team boss Ron Dennis to issue Prost a public apology after the race, sent him down the order to fifth. Patrese was second for Williams, while Alboreto doubled his efforts in Monaco by scoring third. Alessandro Nannini finished fourth, while Gabriele Tarquini was able to bring his barely pre-qualified AGS home in sixth for a well-celebrated point. Mexico was the first time that Prost would publicly complain that his Honda V10 did not seem to work as well as Senna. The United States Grand Prix had a new destination, this time in the hot desert city of Phoenix, Arizona, and the 100-plus-degree dry desert summer heat of Phoenix also made conditions trying. Senna made the most of his skill and scored another pole, Prost again playing second fiddle by over a second. Senna won the start and built up a small lead over Prost. Senna suffered an electrical problem when leading the race and his engine started to misfire. He signaled Prost through to a lead he would not lose on lap 34. Williams ended up being the only team to finish with both cars as the dirty track and unforgiving concrete walls ended 6 races, with the heat and dust cutting out many more. Mansell and Berger suffered with the Ferrari V12s cutting out from identical alternator failures and both eventually retired. Patri's second gave him third place in the championship, while Prost took the lead. The Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal was run in wet conditions and provided many retirements, but also a new winner. Senna was comfortably leading with only 3 laps to go when engine problems forced him to retire, handing Boutsen his first victory. Patrese came home second to make it a 1-2 finish for Williams, the first time a team other than McLaren had achieved this since Ferrari in Monza the previous year, while Andrea de Cesaris picked up third for Dallara, the first ever podium finish for the small Italian team. Triple world champion Nelson Piquet picked up his and Lotus's first points of the year by finishing fourth, only 4.8 seconds behind de Cesaris. René Arnoux would score the final points of his career by finishing fifth for Ligia. Caffi snatched the final point by finishing sixth. In his home race at the Paul Ricard circuit near Marseille, Prost took pole and won convincingly, while fellow Frenchman Jean Alesi made his debut for the Tyrrell team, replacing Alboreto due to the team now having Camel sponsorship, which conflicted with his personal Marlboro sponsorship. This proved to pay off as Alesi secured a fourth-place finish. Nigel Mansell ended Ferrari's run of retirement with a secure second while Patrese was third. Swede Stefan Johansson finished fifth, scoring the Onyx team's first points, and Olivier Grouillard took the final points-paying position. Senna, meanwhile, was forced to retire straight after the restart with a differential problem. The race had to be restarted when, on the first lap, Gugelmin caused a major first corner accident when he lost control of his march, flew into the air and landed on Mansell's rear wing. Luckily, no one was hurt and all drivers managed to take the restart. The French marshals were widely criticized for tipping the upside-down march back on. The British Grand Prix at the very fast Silverstone circuit proved much the same, McLaren front row, Senna retiring from the lead after a spin, and Prost winning. Mansell finished second in his home race to please the British fans, whose Mansellmania coupled with the tifosi made for hysteria. Nannini finished third, Piquet fourth, while both Minotti's, Martini followed by Perez Salar, took the final 2 points positions. At this, the halfway point of the championship, Prost's lead over Senna had increased to 20 points. Britain was the fourth consecutive race Senna had retired from, and Prost had won 3 of those 4 races. At Hockenheim in Germany, however, Senna's bad luck ended after scoring a treble, pole, fastest lap and the win, but he had to fight almost all the way with Prost to do so. After both McLaren suffered bad mid-race stops for tyres, Prost emerged in the lead and looked to have the race in his grasp but lost top gear with less than 2 laps to go. Berger's pointless season continued with a tyre puncture causing a spectacular accident and robbing him of a possible podium. Mansell picked up a third place while Patrese, Piquet and Warwick took the remaining 3 points-paying positions, respectively. The dirty Hungaroring near Budapest provided an almost gripless practice and qualifying, that eventually led to the first non-McLaren pole position of the year. Riccardo Patrese made a Senna-like performance with a 0.31 gap between him and Senna. Another surprise was the equally impressive Alex Caffi, who scored third with a time less than a second slower than that of Patrese, in a car that had been notoriously midfield. The Ferraris, however, suffered badly. Mansell was over 2 seconds off Patrise's time while Berger constantly complained of gear shift troubles, even asking the team to change the gearbox pre-race, which they did not. This eventually cost him a point-scoring position, as the gearbox went on to fail. Countering this was Mansell's impressive 12th to the first race, even overtaking Senna in the area he excelled most, lapping back markers, an impressive move on a track notorious for mediocre and unpassable races. He went on to compare the race to his win at Silverstone 2 years earlier and dedicated it to the late Enzo Ferrari, a year after the old man's death. Caffi's race was the exact counterpoint of Mansell's. Despite a strong start, he finished a lonely 7th, earning no points. Senna finished nearly half a minute behind Mansell in second, while Prost again suffered problems and finished 4th. Patrese retired from the lead and Boutsen finished 3rd. A wet Spa showcased Senna's wet weather skills at their best. Magic shone that day to give him another win despite engine troubles that also befell Prost, with Mansell in third saying that problems like that he could certainly use. He finished less than 2 seconds behind Senna. Boutsen, Nannini and Warwick, in that order, took the final 3 points paying positions. The Italian Grand Prix at the Monza Autodrome sealed the end of two things: Gerhard Berger's terrible season and Prost's relationship with McLaren. Having become progressively distanced from the team due to his conflict with Senna, he announced his switch to Ferrari for 1990, and after inheriting the race win when Senna retired from the lead late on, he proceeded to give the trophy he had won to the Tifosi. McLaren boss Ron Dennis' usual composure was shattered and he hurled his trophy at his driver's feet, storming off as Dennis was unhappy with Prost giving the trophy to the Tifosi, as contractual all trophies won were the property of the team. Prost later said it was an unsatisfactory win and that he did not hold out much hope for the championship despite his points lead, as he felt Honda were clearly favouring Senna. Boutsen inherited third for Williams. The final points went to Patrese, who finished fourth, followed by Britt Martin Brundle for Brabham and Jean Alesi in the Tyrrell. The World Championship was virtually decided in the 13th round at Estoril near Lisbon, as Prost finished second to Berger and Senna retired in controversial circumstances when he collided with Mansell, who had illegally reversed in the pit lane and ignored the resultant black disqualification flags. Mansell was subsequently banned from the next race. This was Prost's 12th points finish of the season, which meant that he now had to drop points as only the 11 best points finishes counted, but he still led by 24 points with 3 races left. Johansson finished a fine third for the struggling Onyx team, a result that meant they did not have to go through pre-qualifying in the first half of 1990, marveling at the car's performance on a low-grip track and speaking of optimism for Spain. Nannini finished in fourth, while Pierluigi Martini qualified fifth and finished in that position, also leading for 1 lap, the only time in the Minardi team's 21-year history that it led a Grand Prix. Tyrrell Racing finished in sixth for the second consecutive race, although it was Jonathan Palmer that earned the point for them in Portugal. The new Williamses, however, suffered near simultaneous and identical motor blowouts. Senna kept the championship alive in Spain by taking pole position and leading throughout, beating Berger by almost half a minute at the Jerez circuit near Seville. Prost drove a cautious race and finished third, dropping more points, but it meant that Senna had to win both remaining races to have any chance of beating the Frenchman to the title. Meanwhile, Alesi scored another strong fourth place for the Tyrrell team. Finishing fifth was Patrese ahead of Philippe Alliot, who would score the only point of the season for the Laris Lola team. The Formula One circus arrived at Suzuka, Japan near Nagoya for the now infamous penultimate round for the championship. Prost said he would not leave the door open for his teammate, who he felt had made far too many risky moves on him. Senna took pole, but Prost beat him away from the grid and led by 1 point for seconds by the end of the first lap. By lap 15, however, Senna was all over the back of Prost's McLaren after moving through both Williams and Benettons. He whittled down Prost's 5-second lead to just under a second by lap 30, but the latter pulled a few seconds ahead by the 35th lap. By the end of lap 46, with 7 to go, the gap was just over a second. Senna, further back than he had been earlier in the race, made a move on Prost in the chicane before the start-finish straight. True to his word, Prost closed the gap and the two skidded into the escape road and both engines stalled. Prost jumped from his car. Senna, however, got a push from the marshals to restart his dead engine and return to the track. After pitting for repairs, Senna worked his way past both Williams and the Benettons to take a 3-second victory. However, his altercation with Prost 7 laps earlier meant he had missed the chicane and, according to FIA and FISA president Jean-Marie Balestre, had not completed the lap. It is worth noting that many drivers in previous races had used the escape roads near chicanes after on-track incidents, as is customary, without receiving penalties. A penalty could have been given for restarting his stalled engine, which is technically illegal, but the stewards only considered the shortcut for the penalty. He was disqualified and Nannini revelled in his first Grand Prix victory. The new Williams FW13S of Patrese and Boutsen finished second and third, putting them 5 points ahead of the Ferrari team in the race for second. Piquet, Brundle and Warwick clinched the remaining point-paying positions. The final round at Adelaide saw the race run under heavy rain. Prost elected to withdraw at the end of the first lap in such torrentially wet conditions and would score no points. Senna, who considered quitting in protest of his disqualification in the previous race, was convinced to race by friends and team members. Starting from pole, by lap 10 he had over 30 seconds to the Williams pair and counting. Instead of relaxing, he continued to push in poor visibility. On lap 13, he ran into the rear of Brundle's Brabham and was out of the race. The two Williams-Renault scored a double podium finish with Boutsen winning and Patrese coming in third, Nannini finishing between them. The Australian Grand Prix was overshadowed by the ongoing controversy surrounding the Japanese race, but once the appeals had been considered, Prost was crowned the champion for the third time.